Welcome Home, a podcast for veterans, about veterans by veterans, is a project of Willing Warriors and the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run.
Good morning. I'm Larry Ziliak, your host, Director of Culinary Services here at the Warrior Retreat at Bull Run. And today our guest is Molly Brooks, and she's with Heroes Bridge, which is in Fauquier County, just a little bit south of the retreat. And we've asked her to stop by and tell us all about Heroes Bridge, what they do, some of the things they got coming up. And I know there's some really big stuff in the future for the organization. So I'm really excited about having her here and having a chance to hear all about it. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit about Heroes Bridge, how it got started, and really what the focus of the organization is. A little bit different than most veteran service organizations.
Sure. So I guess I have to go back in time a little bit. I guess to my upbringing, my dad was a career Marine, 2 tours in Vietnam, and he retired when I was very young. I was the last of 5 kids. So I was only 6 when he retired, and so I kind of grew up in his footsteps, where my older brothers and sisters, he was gone a lot. From the opposite for me, he no longer worked, and it was just me and him. He bought a small hobby farm. So definitely have that upbringing of being raised by this kind of giant of a man, Vietnam veteran that was amazing, but also struggled like so many of our Vietnam veterans did. He struggled with some mental health issues, but also some physical issues. He was diagnosed with diabetes at a very young age, which, just thought bad luck back then, but came out later that, of course, it was Agent Orange exposure. So I have that background, but grew up and became a nurse. And I always loved working with older people from nursing school on, and I chose to specialize in gerontology, the care of older people, very early. So I think you kind of bring your childhood experiences to whatever your profession is. So I always kind of gravitated in my nursing career to the older veterans, and been a nurse now 30 years. That's hard to say. It just goes by so fast. But I noticed that not all, but a lot of our older veterans weren't doing okay. Especially our Vietnam veterans as they got older. I noticed it a lot over my career, but in 2016 decided, it shouldn't be this way. And decided to found a nonprofit in our kind of small town of Warrenton in Fauquier County, just for older veterans. So if you think about 2016, Iraq and Afghanistan were still going on, and there were so many nonprofits that were serving our younger veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was glad, they need that. If our older veterans had that kind of service back then, there probably wouldn't need to be a Heroes Bridge. But when, as a nurse, I would reach out about older veterans, what they need is so very different than what younger veterans need. So it wasn't always a match. And I always kind of there should be something just for older veterans. And in 2016, I took the leap and founded the organization and really built the programs, I hope, around kind of more what older veterans need. So it's been about 7 years now, and it's been probably one of my greatest joys in life, kind of growing it and taking care of that population of older veterans.
So for a lot of our listeners, they may not know that some of the more well-known nonprofit veteran service organizations out there, like the Wounded Warrior Project, just service post 9/11 veterans.
Yeah.
And they're a huge organization. They bring a tremendous amount of resources to the table, but they're not available for older veterans.
Right. Yeah. It's funny you say that. So I was fortunate to participate in a leadership program that the George W. Bush Presidential Library hosts every summer, and I was selected one of 50. And you have to do a project when you go there for the summer. And my project was kind of looking at the needs of older veterans. Of course, that's where I wanted to focus. And Wounded Warrior Project was very gracious in digging into their data. And they have an amazing call center that serves younger veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. You're right, just post 9/11. But they pulled the data, and they receive about 10,000 calls per year from older veterans whom isn't in their mission. And there's nothing wrong with that. Every nonprofit has to choose a mission.
Sure.
You can't serve everyone.
Can't do everybody, right?
But yeah, the older veterans were reaching out, and there really does need to be something just for them.
Mm-hmm. And so help us define older veteran.
Yeah, well, there's lots of ways to define it. We chose to define it as 65 and older.
Okay.
Just because there has to be a line somewhere. And for me as a gerontologist, it was often where people may start having issues. They've retired. They don't know what to do now. They maybe lose a spouse that was kind of managing the household. Your kids move away. So we kind of looked at that age as sometimes that's where you start needing help. And that's where we chose to draw the line. Back then, when I first founded the organization, it also really it bifurcated the two veteran populations. 65 and older was almost exclusively Vietnam, Korea, and World War II, and of course, all the periods in between. Recently, though, this year, actually, I guess the Desert Storm veterans are starting to age out because we get now a couple Desert Storm veterans each month on our services. We get calls about them. My husband hates when I say that because that's his generation. He's hard to believe they're getting to where they need help. But so we choose to divide it at 65 and older.
Okay. Yeah. And so you receive calls for all sorts of services, I'm imagining.
We really do.
What are some of the primary services that you provide for this older population?
Yeah, I always like to kind of say it's never the veterans that call us. We serve about 600 veterans. We follow them. And I could probably count on one hand the time it was the actual veteran that called for help. We get most of our calls from hospitals, social services, other like nonprofits and churches that have come across an older veteran that isn't doing well or needs help. And I think the number one call, the reason people call us, is a veteran that is socially isolated. So for whatever reason, they've ended up in their later years with no one to help them. And it happens, I really think there's a few different kind of veterans that we see. We see veterans that have never been okay since their wartime, and they just never had families. And then we have another set that came home and now they're estranged from their families because a lot of our Vietnam veterans did not receive help and sometimes turned to drugs and alcohol and had anger issues and may have lost their family in the process. So we unfortunately have a lot that are estranged from their family and are now alone. And then I think the third set is they've kind of outlived their family. A lot of our Korean War veterans and World War II veterans have kind of outlived everyone that loved them. So we just have a lot that end up alone. And that is the number one issue. We have hospitals, case managers that are trying to send an older veteran home and they realize there's no one there to help them with anything. So what we do about that is we assign every veteran we get a call about what we call a battle buddy. There's a model of care. We actually train our battle buddies in something called the community health worker model of care. And they're first and foremost a friend to that veteran. But they're also a little bit of a navigator because it's very different. Every veteran, we get a call about what they need. So we have an assessment that we do, and then that battle buddy just starts solving problems as best we can. And so that is number one, the social isolation. They need a friend and they need a navigator. By far, the number two issue is housing related issues. Substandard housing, broken housing they've aged and they can no longer get around their own home, unaffordable housing, just a lot of housing issues. So those are our two things, social isolation and housing issues. Yeah.
And what role does some of the mental health and the self-medicating play in this? I mean, it seems to me that I see a lot of situations where it's sort of a downward spiral and there's a number of factors. It's usually not just one factor. And so I'm just curious as to, I'm sure you take a kind of all treatment and approach to it and say, okay, what are the different issues, and let's get help on each one of these. But who do you reach out for that? Are you using county resources or state resources or private insurance or?
Yeah. So you're right. Mental health is often one of the problems that they're facing. And so the Battle Buddy does an assessment. And as you know, a lot of people think that all veterans get whatever they need from the VA,
Right.
but it's actually rather complex. And some veterans we can assess and they do rate care from the VA. And of course, we connect them to those resources. And the VA has really done a lot of work in the last 5 years to around mental health and the suicide issue. It'll never be done. It'll never be done. And it seems like it'll never be enough. But every VA hospital has a suicide intervention team where they follow veterans that are at risk, older or younger, thank goodness. And so that's the first thing is, should the VA be helping this veteran? Because small nonprofits can only afford and have the resources to do so much. And we really want the entities that sent them to war, the government, to kind of be doing what they're supposed to be doing. So that's the first step.
And let me point this out. The older you get, the harder it is to navigate the VA system.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
It's a struggle.
It's a struggle for young people,
yes,
right?
Yeah, it is. Just the paperwork, the time it takes, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
And if you have issues that you need help with, you need that help now.
Right.
It can be overwhelming. And having that navigator, that advocate, is so important.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. You're right. It's even difficult for our younger veterans to navigate. The first thing they do is tell you to go online, like, oh, go online and fill this out, or fax us your DD 214. Now, who has a fax?
Well, right there you see that they're just opposing things, because the younger veteran doesn't hardly know what a fax is.
Exactly.
And the older veteran probably hasn't had a computer that works in years.
Exactly, or ever. Yeah, there seems to be a cutoff line somewhere between 75 and 80 where they never did the technology thing. Yeah. Like they don't have a smartphone, they don't have a printer in their house. So our battle buddies can kind of act as a liaison. They can take a tablet to the home and here's the VA site. We can't do it for them. We're not allowed to, but we can sit beside them as they fill out the online form. The VA still remarkably relies on fax a lot. So we had to have a fax line added to our office. The T-Mobile was like, what? Like nobody asked for that anymore. And I said, well, talk to the VA because they do. So yeah, our battle buddies do help navigate that system. But for the veterans that won't connect with the VA, my father never would connect with the VA. And there are many Vietnam veterans that for a variety of reasons will not, or the ones that are evaluated and they don't qualify for certain benefits, then the battle buddies do work really hard to connect them to local resources, mental health resources.
How about the Virginia Department of Veteran Services?
Yeah, we love them.
Yeah.
We love them. I'm really proud of the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth, and what they've done for veteran care. So they have a whole line that will navigate them through the benefits. And then they have a whole nother, I'm sure you know, family support, family services and supports. That's been spun up a lot in the last 5 years, and we rely on them a lot. We hope they also rely on us for older veterans, because I'm not sure if this is still the case. They used to have a rule where they couldn't go to the veterans' home. The veterans had to go to their state offices. So sometimes we would be that liaison that would run over to the home and have something filled out or something. But yeah, we love the Virginia Department of Veteran Services. They've always been really good to us and our veterans.
We've worked with them a fair amount as well. And they do a tremendous job. And especially now we have a real push on for PAC Act claims, with the Agent Orange and things like that. And with the August 9th deadline coming up for that 1 year compensation, they're just working nonstop over there. And we really appreciate the work they do.
Right.
What's in the future?
Oh, so we just on June 1st expanded our services into all of Northern Virginia and out to the West Virginia state line. We received state funding from two different departments in the state of Virginia. The Department of Veteran Services gave us some funding, as did the Virginia Department of Rural Health, who is very worried about seniors living out in the rural areas. So we received funding. We've always served a 5-county area since we were formed, and now we just expanded to like 11 counties, and it's a little overwhelming, but we're excited and blessed to have the support to do that.
Did you go to them or did they come to you, the Rural Service Health Department?
The Rural Health Department came to us. Wow. They heard about our work, and you know what I don't know. I started to say funny, but I'm not sure if it's funny. There was so much money given out by the federal government during COVID as like COVID recovery money.
Sure.
And it filtered to the states. And I think the states actually had trouble matching the money to people that were actually really doing good work.
Right.
And they found us, and the Department of Veteran Services. It was a little bit mutual. We've worked really closely. So I had met with the commissioner, and he said, "Hey, we have this grant coming up and you need to apply." So I guess I don't know who found who there, but I think that just kind of enforces the collaboration between veteran nonprofits. There's so many of us, thank goodness, but we're so much more powerful when we work together. I was so happy you just gave me the tour of your beautiful property here. And I just hope we're all friends and collaborate, and
Sure.
We're just so much stronger network when we do that.
I have found that here with the, we call it the Regional Veterans Collaborative, which is a combination of VSOs here in Prince William County and Fairfax. And then we have the Northern Virginia Veteran Suicide Coalition, which is a number of VSOs that come together to try and help combat that issue. And I can say we're getting brochures made for a new program we call Operation Save the Number. It tells a veteran how to save the new 988+1 number in their buddy's phone.
Oh, good.
And so there's instructions on saving it in an Android and instructions on saving it in an iPhone.
I love it.
And say, hey, if you're having issues and you think you need help, call me. But if you can't get hold of me, press this button here and talk to a VA counselor.
I love that. That's an amazing campaign.
So we're very excited about that. And we're also working with somebody who's in your neighborhood, is Czech and his guys down at the VFW in Warrenton.
Okay.
They have started dog tags for life. And it is a dog tag with the 988+1 number on it.
Oh.
And what's really nice is that the metal that it's made of, when you put it on your keys, it makes a particular sound. So every time you pick up your keys, you think of that
kind of reminds you.
Yeah. And so I definitely want to put you in touch with
we need
them.
those, yeah.
And they are crushing it with those dog tags. They were here for our Vets for Vets and gave out a lot of them.
Okay.
I also wanted, are you working at all with the Home Depot Foundation?
The Home Depot Foundation has been good to us for kind of major home repairs that we come across with some of our older veterans. For instance, we had a complete heating system go out for one veteran. He was carrying water from a boiler like up and down the steps. It was terrible. And they bought him a whole new heating system, like $5,000. We are talking to them about our village project, which I know you asked me what's on the horizon, and we should probably talk about that.
I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, so are we. And I got more excited looking at everything you're doing around here. But we are talking to the Home Depot Foundation about hopefully helping us with that project. They've been following it and say they probably will. But yeah, they do great things for veterans.
They really do. Their goal, from what I understand, is to reach that $500 million worth of assistance to veterans and veteran organizations by 2025.
Nice.
And they do crazy stuff for us here. When we need help with something, they are the first ones to step up, either with volunteers or with material.
Or both.
Yeah, or both, yeah. So, so tell us about this plan for the tiny village.
Yeah, well, I think, as I said, our number 2 issue is housing problems. And, some of our veterans, we're visiting them in their natural habitat. So we're going into their own homes. And sometimes when we leave their house, we just have to sit in our car for a while because we feel so bad. Like they have infestations or the house is falling down around them or there's not good heat or cooling. And that's happened for years. And the board and I began to talk about, like, how do we stop putting a Band-Aid on some of these situations? Because some of the homes can't be remediated. They're either rentals. We're not going to fix up a house for a landlord. Or the house it's a trailer that just really can't be remediated, different situations. So how do we stop putting a Band-Aid? These veterans need to just be brought into a safer, more supportive environment. So we started looking at some of the micro housing projects around the country, the tiny homes. I'll be the first to say they're not all done well. It really takes a quality organization that's thinking through the permanent supportive services that are built into the village. But we visited a couple that we loved and we declared our intentions. I guess it's been about 2.5 years that we were going to do a micro housing project in Fauquier County. The village that we loved the most, it wasn't for veterans, but was in the Ozarks where I grew up, which some people may not know this, but it's a very economically depressed part of the country. And they had a beautiful community. And I thought, if an area of the country that is so economically depressed can build something like this, we can do it in the 11th wealthiest county in the country.
Exactly.
If we can't, we just don't want to. So I came back and started talking to the county supervisors because there's just so many zoning and land use issues when you try to do something. And I was scared to death. I see all the fights about land use and zoning and the data centers. And to my surprise, the county supervisors could not have been more excited and supportive and got that we're in a little bit of an affordable housing crisis across the board, not just for veterans or seniors.
Everywhere you look.
Yeah, it's bad. And it's bad across the country, I think, but the DC metro area, it's terrible. There's just not enough stock. So we've been working on it. We've found our spot. It's right in the town of Warrenton. The engineers and architects, we did the feasibility phase and they planned 44 cottages. We don't call them tiny homes because people seem to get allergic to that term. They start worrying what you're going to build.
Sure.
And they're actually not quite as tiny. I think a lot of times people picture like the Tiny Home Nation show where they're like climbing up a ladder into a loft.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
No, not for our veterans, but they're about 560 square feet, which we did a market study, and that's kind of similar to senior apartments in our community.
Right.
They'll be all aging in place, 0 step, all the other aging related, wide doors, accessible bathrooms and everything. Fundraising has gone well. We think we need about $6 million to do this project.
Right.
And we have commitments of almost $2 million, either cash that people have given or commitments of $2 million. So we have a ways to go. But yeah, it's been really amazing to see how excited people are about it.
I think a lot of people realize that housing for older veterans is a serious issue because, as you say, they're in a house that they may have been in for a long time. Yeah. And it is way bigger than their needs. The older they get, the harder it is to keep it up. They are on a pension or receiving some disability pay. So they don't really have the money to pay $8,000 for new gutters.
Yeah.
Or even $1,500 for a ramp. So this idea of putting them in that zero barrier, smaller home that it's not tiny in that they're constricted. It's built for their needs,
right,
and the size that they need,
right,
and the size that works for them.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because a lot of our veterans, even if their home is kind of single family or bigger, they've often hollowed out a certain section they live in and they don't use the rest of the house. So you're exactly right. And the other thing is the yard maintenance. They just physically can't do it.
Yeah, not pushing a mower when it's 110 degree heat index.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't even want to do that, right?
Sure.
Another important part of the village is that there will be a community center in the middle. And we want to build in supportive services. So we want to have benefits officers that visit once a month, a physician that visits once a month. We want to have a small food pantry that if they forgot something at the store, they can grab it real quick. Of course, volunteers that come in and support them. And you told me about so many amazing things you guys do here, and it gave me 100 ideas. So there will be a place where they can gather and receive a lot of supports within the village too.
And is food insecurity something that you see amongst the older veterans?
It is. And sometimes it's financial, they can't afford food, but you know what? It's often, they can't drive.
Transportation.
Yeah, so they can't get to the grocery store.
Right.
It's also some barriers I think people don't think about. There's one gentleman, he can't drive. So people were bringing him groceries, but he was blind. He has macular degeneration and has lost most of his vision, so he couldn't see to cook well either. So he really needed prepared meals, but he was a little bit over the income to qualify for Meals on Wheels. So we have a program. It's called Mom's Meals. It's a big nationwide company. It's kind of like the Amazon of food delivery. So it's prepared meals. All they have to do is warm it, and it comes right on their doorstep every 2 weeks, and it's super simple. So sometimes it's finances, but sometimes it's kind of more logistical barriers. So we do send those meals to several veterans. Now we're starting to send them to veterans around the country with our expansion. It's just easy for them, and they need good nutrition, and they can be tailored to diets. Like there's cardiac ones or diabetic ones. Yeah.
Oh, that's huge, actually.
Yeah.
Because, anybody who lacks the financial resources to be able to put into the type of food they're buying usually ends up with the cheapest food, which is the worst for you.
Yes, absolutely.
And, that's just going to aggravate conditions that they may have, such as memory issues or, just health issues that are going to cause them to fall or anything like that.
I'm sure you've seen it too. Sometimes they 1 month they'll buy their medicines and then the next month they'll stock up on groceries. So they're kind of choosing between critical things that they need. So if we can solve the nutrition issue, we're always happy to do that.
Yeah, that's great. And I had somebody tell me one time, well, yeah, I know they can't drive anymore, but, you can order your food online and they'll deliver it to you. And I'm like, they don't use a computer.
Exactly. They can't DoorDash.
Right.
And not to mention the expense or the rural areas.
That's right. It's not available everywhere. You live in a city.
Yeah, you can't DoorDash in Amosville. So it's nice to think that way, and it may work in some situations.
So for those of you who are listening that are not in the area, Amosville, your cell phone doesn't work there.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very
true. That is just super exciting news. So before we go, what's the best way for people to get hold of you? If I have a friend or a relative who needs help, who's in your area, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. We just established our first toll-free nationwide number. It's 866-OLD-VETS, which we hope isn't offensive. We actually polled a lot of our older veterans, and that was their favorite one out of our options. So 866-OLD-VETS. We'll get you into our call center and we'll take down the information and go from there. You can also go to our website, which is just heroesbridge.org. And there's one of those contact us forms that you can fill out.
Okay.
Or we have an email, info@heroesbridge.org, if you prefer just to send an email.
Okay. And the reason for the nationwide number, I mean, you're now going to get calls from all sorts of crazy places.
Yeah.
How are you going to provide services for them?
Yeah, well, we already are getting the calls we have been for probably about the last year. I guess people are just starting to hear more about us. We had an article in the Epic Times, which I had never heard of, but apparently a lot of other people have. And we got a lot of calls after that. My participation in the Bush Institute's program kind of got us a little bit of publicity. The VA in June sent out, surprised us. We didn't know it. They did a blog that went out to 13 million veterans, and we got 300 calls within 72 hours. So the word's getting out. So we're just taking a leap of faith. And the state has given us some funding to hire a couple of dedicated people. So we're a little nervous, but we're taking a leap of faith. And we've had to do that a few times over the years. Like, can we really offer veterans meals? Like, how are we going to? And we've always been supported by the community. So we're taking another leap. We are a little nervous about it, but we feel like we can do it, and we feel like we have to do it. I actually never wanted to start a nonprofit. I wish Heroes Bridge wasn't needed, but it is. Sure. So sometimes we just say we're going to do this, and that's what we're doing with the toll-free number.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, you're doing amazing work, and I would encourage anybody who has an extra $6 million laying around to give Molly a call, because this the cottage little village sounds just so amazing. And what would be even better is if you build it, and now there's a blueprint for it, and then there was one built in Iowa, and there was one built in New York, and there was one built in Connecticut, and every state should have one.
Yeah, absolutely. And certain states would need more than one. And we have had reach outs that have heard about the project. Like, we would love to do that here. And I always say, well, let me get the first one down, because you're right. I think once it's very difficult, complex, but then it will be repeatable. The business arrangements will be done, and you just repeat it, and learned so much in finding the right spot and the right land for it. So we are excited, and I really hope people are excited when they hear about it. You asked how to reach out, but I really hope people will follow us. So we have a pretty active Facebook page.
Okay.
If anyone wants to follow us on there. And then on our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. We don't spam. We usually just send that one newsletter a month,
right,
and it'll just kind of keep you updated on everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I get the newsletter, and
good.
I read it every time it comes, and it's great because it does give us, everything you guys are doing. And I love the stories that are in there about the contact with the veterans and their personal stories that are included in the newsletter. It's really something.
Thank you.
So listen, thank you so much for coming and visiting us here at the Warrior Retreat and taking time to tell us all about Heroes Bridge. It's an amazing veteran service organization. It's just doing incredible work here in Virginia, and we just wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you so much. Thanks for what you guys do here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we'll have another episode next week. Until then, thanks for listening.
The Welcome Home podcast is brought to you by Willing Warriors, a nonprofit organization serving active duty service members and veterans since 2012. To learn more, please visit our webpage at willingwarriors.org.